welcome. If you are unfamiliar with freeCodeCamp, they are an international nonprofit that is dedicated to providing accessible tech education for everyone for free forever. They got a website over at freecodecamp.org, and you can check that out and you can sign up and start learning how to code today for free. We are freeCodeCamp Indy, which is the official local chapter in Indianapolis, Indiana, that's ran entirely by volunteers. We offer help for beginner to intermediate programmers. We provide a supportive community for learning and career transitioning, and we like to host events to encourage collaboration and learning how to work as a team, such as hackathons and project days and talks and workshops. We are on meetup.com, so you can find our future live events published there. You can also subscribe to this YouTube channel. We do a talk every month from different speakers, so we'll be posting those on here if you want to subscribe to see those in the future. Okay, everyone, welcome to freeCodeCamp Indy. We've got Gwen Faraday. She's going to introduce herself and give a talk. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Gwen. I think I know maybe half of you and the other half I don't. So let me introduce myself. So yeah, my name is Gwen. I currently work as a tech lead at Relevize. I became a tech lead this year. Relevize is a remote SaaS startup based in Boston, but we're fully distributed now and growing across the country. So we have a few team members in Indiana, including me. I'm also a core team member of freeCodeCamp of the national organization. So I'm on the staff, I guess the official staff for freeCodeCamp. Jared already introduced it pretty much, but we create content for people in every country of the world, even China, North Korea, everywhere. So it's a really amazing organization that I am very happy to be a part of. And I also create some of my own content, although I've been moving recently, so I haven't done too much at Faraday Academy, so you can look me up. I do some live streaming and a couple other things on there. Yeah, so that's pretty much me. Over the years, I guess what's relevant to this talk is over the years, I've worked at 3 different coding schools so far, and I've been able to be an instructor as well as a mentor and seen people in various levels of their career growth. I've also been through it recently. I'm hitting my 7th year anniversary in like 2 months. So I've seen a lot of things. There's a lot of things that I wish I knew years ago. I feel like I did a lot of just-in-time learning. And so that was one reason why behind me wanting to do talks like this and do some videos on my YouTube channel is to kind of share what I've learned over time and the things that I wish I understood a long time ago. So the itinerary, you kind of saw this on the meetup page, but I'm basically going to talk about the different levels or stages of software development and different recommendations and opinions that I have and that are shared by a lot of people in the community from what I've read about how to progress through levels, about different career options and also different types of companies to work at. And then also some suggestions from my experience, how to choose what you want to do with your career and how to set goals aligned with your career. So I will warn you, there are quite a few listicles. I was trying to figure out ways to put more images or video, but I just couldn't figure it out. So I hope that you will interact with me, ask questions. And this is my first time giving this talk, so if you have any feedback, it would be great to hear that after as well. But you can feel free to stop me at any time to make it seem like I'm not talking to myself. Okay, so I wanted to start with this slide, basically because from the juniors I've mentored and from my own experience, people have a very narrow view of what a software development career will be. Everybody's basically trying to build a few of their first projects. They just see this end goal as getting their first software development job. they think kind of abstractly like, oh, I'm in the future at some point, somehow I'm going to get promoted and get a raise. Eventually, I think I want to work remote and I want to get promoted again and make more money. And then they have no idea, right? And I had no idea when I was starting out. I didn't know anything about software development careers and levels and all of those things. So this is a little bit about my story, and I think it's maybe the story of some other people in the community and maybe you as well. So I studied off and on for years. I finally got it together and got more serious about my studies and started networking in the community. I kept getting rejected. It felt like nobody wanted to talk to me before my first job. And finally, I got someone who knew me. They had a connection that hooked me up with their company. And eventually I got my first job. It wasn't an ideal job, but it was a job. But it was basically a company that happened to need a web developer. It wasn't a tech company, which is where I wanted to end up. So and it was also very far away and I had no car, so it was a little hard to get there. But I worked really hard and went to a lot of hackathons and studied. And then after after somewhere in 4 to 6 months, lots of companies, I wouldn't say lots, but companies started to reach out to me instead of me having to reach out to all kinds of companies. And so I got my second job a little while later, and then it was my favorite job, but the company split up. It was a small company, so I had to leave. And then I had many more jobs over the years. I tried many different areas of development. I worked in cross-platform mobile, web, cloud, IoT, ML for 14 months. And then I worked in blockchain off and on for a while. I decided I wanted to try an enterprise because FANG companies and all that are so cool. Realized I didn't like it and I wanted to go back to startups. I failed really poorly twice in choosing a good company, the right fit for me. And I learned a lot about the questions I should be asking in interviews through that experience. After almost 4 years, I got a job as a senior developer, and I have some details about what the different levels mean. And I got burned out a few times, pushing myself and not realizing what my limits were. I don't know why these all popped up at once, but and then more recently, so I worked as a senior developer for a few years. Most of that time was at a consulting company, or is that split between 2 companies really? And then more recently, last year, I became a principal engineer, which is called staff engineering levels in the industry. And then this year I became a tech lead and kind of learned what a tech lead really meant in the last less than a year. So I made this map, but this isn't totally inspired by me because a lot of companies use maps like this to describe their engineering levels. So I'm going to go step by step and then look at the breakdowns and everything of each level there. So I think it's helpful to see a diagram like this because it's not just a linear progression through a career in software development. Initially, most of the time it will be linear going from like junior to mid to senior. But after that, your career branches off in so many different directions. Some people choose to remain in senior, being an individual contributor for most of their career if they really like being in the code all the time, or they choose to be in technical leadership or people management or take some other kind of specialty role. And those post individual contributor roles are just a few examples of roles that you can be after you work as a developer for some time. So we can look at these briefly individually. So I call these pre-dev roles. I know some people stay as freelancers, but most people will use freelancer as kind of a gateway into development to get a little bit of experience. So you're a student, you work on your personal projects or maybe open source projects, and you might freelance and use kind of all those areas to gain some type of knowledge and experience. before you move into work as a developer. So the software development industry is not as standardized as other engineering industries. Of course, we're not super regulated, and there aren't really certifications that we need to have. But the industry in itself has kind of standardized these levels. If you look at a lot of the medium or bigger tech companies, they have levels that look like this. And the bigger the company, the more levels they'll have in between here. But I just kind of condensed them down into the basic levels. So level 0, intern, and then you get a job as a junior developer. A lot of people skip the intern level, but some people do get an internship for a short amount of time, but I'll talk about that in a minute. And then you go to mid-level developer. Usually you stay there for a few years, and then you'll either find a job or be promoted as a senior developer. And then you can choose to go down the track that I've gone down recently. These are just examples. Some companies call these different things, but there'll be some flavor of staff engineer at most companies, which is a position of technical leadership in the company. And sometimes companies will switch these around. And also a lot of people move into and out of positions of technical leadership throughout their career. And then if you want to get into more of the people management, you have dev manager, director of engineering, VP of engineering, or CTO. Depending on the company, sometimes these are structured a little bit differently. And then some other roles that you might take. A lot of people who have already made it to a senior level will choose to start working for themselves, at which point they don't consider themselves freelancers, but consultants, and they'll usually specialize in some area, .NET or something else, and contract with companies on certain projects and be paid well. So there's architect, and they do a very niche, they play a very niche architecture role. Usually the company has to be a little bit bigger to have that position. And if they're big enough, they'll be called enterprise architect, and they might have a team of architects working with them. And then there's a newer field, kind of developer evangelism, where you don't need that much developer experience to really work as a developer evangelist. So those are kind of the roles broken down quickly, and I can go into some more detail. So I kind of broke up each of these role types. So I'm going to just quickly talk about intern. So these are also based off of the roles that we implemented at my company. So level 0 is someone with really no experience whatsoever. They come in as an intern, and really companies don't expect much in the way of meaningful contributions to the company. They expect it to kind of be a loss for the company. But the goal of most companies when they hire interns is that they see potential in that person, and the goal is to hire them within a year of their internship. So they think that if this person has potential to come on board, we think they would be a good fit later on, we'll go ahead and give them an internship. Even though they're not going to contribute now, we think they're valuable down the road. So this is usually a very low or no paying job, but it can be good to get experience, especially since it's very hard for most people to get their first job in technology. And usually with an internship, that will be at some kind of established company if they have an internship program. And so usually you'll get some good mentorship opportunities that are incredibly valuable for free. So how to get an internship. So usually, and a lot of interns or internship programs can only come through a school, like they'll partner with colleges, but there are a lot of larger companies, especially since software development's so in demand. They'll let people, self-learners or bootcamp grads, apply directly for internships at companies. And if there is no internship program, then some companies will still take on an intern. For example, at my company, before I started, That was before they had raised this round. They just needed some people who could code. And so they did hire in intern level, someone with no professional experience at the company. And it actually worked out. So, and there are a few local companies like SEP. I've mentioned them a few times, but I think they really have their stuff together. They have a very good mentorship program, probably the best that I've seen anywhere. So I would definitely check them out if you have time. Okay, junior. So this is where a lot of people start, especially if you didn't come in through traditional education. So I called it level 1. Some people put this at level 0 if they don't have interns, but something around here. So usually you'll have little to no experience, although at my company, we require someone to have at least 1 year of experience to be level 1. So we basically expect people to onboard and be able to handle small tickets within the first 3 months. We actually have a 2-week onboarding program, and then we have 3 months worth of monthly milestones for them to hit, so we can check in regularly and we can see people's progress. And basically, for the entirety of being a junior engineer, usually you're paired with, most companies will pair you with a senior or some kind of staff developer who will be your mentor at the company. And if you don't have that, then I think it's really good to ask for that. And yeah, you won't work on complex projects, but you will probably get lots of small tasks, bug tickets, and it's just kind of something that most people have to work through in their career. And it's also why I think a lot of junior developers are not very happy with their job. And sometimes they aren't given a path forward at their first job. So the majority of junior developers or first-time job developers will leave their job after 1 year. So at most companies, because of that, something we're also trying to prevent at my company. So we're talking about ways to give people opportunities after their first year and still progress, or their first year at our company. So how to get a junior position. This is something I gave a talk on a long time ago here, some of these things. But the best way to get a position, any position really, but especially a junior position, is through networking. And I think I've gotten most of my jobs through networking, going to local meetups, any kind of event. We used to have a tech conference hosted in Indiana, but we don't anymore since COVID. But there are a bunch in cities within a 5-hour drive of us. And yeah, so let me just tell my story here. So I guess at the January 2015, I think I was like really shy and I started going to meetups. I didn't know anybody. So actually Jared, wherever he is, he was one of the first people to ever talk to me at a meetup. He already worked at Salesforce. And so I met a couple of people like him. They started introducing me to people, and I started to get more comfortable in the community, and I realized that the best way to network was actually to give talks, because when you give a talk, everybody knows who you are. They're stuck like listening to you for a while, and then they'll want to come up and talk to you after. So you make a lot of connections through giving talks and participating in other ways. So one thing I did virtually was I also created a blog about my learning journey back then. And I started creating content, and actually quite a few people found me through my online content. And what was interesting, especially when I went to get my second and third job, is that companies I was interviewing with, they already read my blog. So it felt like they knew me already. So it was a much more comfortable interview, and I wasn't going in cold, I guess. And now that I have so many live streams and other things online, I don't, or this company did, but some companies haven't given me a technical interview. They'll just like rush me through more because I've done a lot of work, and I guess they feel like I've proven myself in other ways in the community. And also, people weirdly think that when you're talking about a topic or when you're making a video about a topic, you must be an expert in that topic. So they just trust you more. So I always recommend that, you know, everybody start a blog or do something to give you some kind of visibility. So yeah, and a lot of times with the first position, it's just something that you have to be a little less picky. You might not be remote, it might not be your ideal company, you might not be passionate about what problem they're solving, but if it gives you experience in the industry, usually with 1 year or sometimes a little bit more than a year of experience, you can go work almost anywhere at that point, because tech workers are so in demand right now. And another thing that has been really successful for me is I've used interviews as a learning opportunity. So even if I thought maybe I didn't want to work at the company, I would go to the interview. And just going to an interview gives me a connection at that company. So maybe later they move to a different company, or I meet them at a meetup, I already have a connection with that person. And sometimes I recommend someone else for them to interview. And sometimes that's worked out as well. So yeah, so that's some advice I have about getting a junior developer position. Some things that I recommend, I can't remember how many of you are new to development. Maybe you're already working as a junior. So some things that I wish I had learned more about when I was first starting out was agile and project management skills. I was incredibly bad at breaking down tasks, managing my own tasks, giving people estimates. Even though my second job, I was working for a consulting company technically. So I had to do that, but I had a senior developer doing, a super senior developer, I guess, doing most of it for me. So it took me a long time to learn that. I think if I had studied more and really tried to break things down more, and kind of learned a lot more about how agile worked, it would have been much better for me in my first couple years of development. And there's a book that I recommend at the end of this talk about that. So another thing I notice, I'm working with a couple of juniors now, and I've just noticed it in most people, is that new developers have a lot of trouble knowing when to ask for help. They will struggle and beat their head on something for a long time. And I'm like, why didn't you just ask me? And they're, you know, for different reasons. And I don't want to blame anybody, but they're scared or nervous, or they think like they have this imposter syndrome, like, oh, I'm really dumb that I can't figure this thing out, and those kind of things. But I think the more senior someone becomes, the more they learn and judge like when to ask somebody and how long to struggle through something. So I think that's a good balance. And that's also a really good question that maybe a mentor or someone else at the company can help you with. And I think it's always better to err on the side of like over communicating and over asking for help, and then you might find some happy medium in there. But just for me, working as a tech lead, I find it a little frustrating when people, you know, time and again, they don't ask me when I feel like I could solve it with them very quickly and they could move on and become unblocked. So yeah, and another thing that I think is critical to development is to learn how to write well, and not just code. I mean, like documentation, technical writing, being able to write design docs and convey ideas. There are a lot of developers that aren't great at writing because they have not practiced that skill. And I've been at several companies where I fixed a lot of their documentation. They had some very poor documentation, and it made it harder for people to onboard. Yeah, so some of the books I recommend can talk a little bit more about how critically important good documentation standards are. That's something I've also realized over the years. So I spend quite a bit of time every day, like checking in on our docs, making sure they're good, seeing what needs to be updated, stuff like that. So yeah, and it's also very important. I think I mentioned mentors several times in this talk. That's maybe the number one thing that's helped me in my career, finding mentors at the next level as me. It's great if they can be at the company that you work at and also in the local community, so that when you leave a company, go to the next one, you still have some mentorship opportunities. Of course, if you go to meetups, usually you naturally meet mentors. So yeah, as a junior, it's really good to study a lot, try out lots of things, try to mess up as much as possible, ask lots of questions, take lots of notes. Okay, so mid-level. So most people spend about 3 years in mid-level before going to senior. Some people 2 years. It really depends on what type of company you're working at. If you're working at startups, usually you'll make it to through mid-level a little bit more quickly, but this is just kind of in general. So mid-level developers, you've kind of hit a spot where you can work more independently, and you'll still be receiving technical direction from staff or senior level members of the team, but you'll have a lot more autonomy. You won't always be partnered with someone kind of watching over you. You'll have a little bit more freedom, but this is really where I think the push is to take yourself to the next level, because there usually aren't that many requirements going from junior to mid-level. You have to learn some good coding practices, you have to learn a couple things, and then you have to show that you can finish your tickets and work well with other people, like some pretty basic things. It's a little bit harder to go from mid-level to senior, so you'll start slowly taking on those projects of increasing complexity. Yeah, so how to get a mid-level position. A lot of it is just working with people more senior, asking them for advice. A lot of senior people, I've noticed, they get a little tired of answering questions all the time, especially if it's a company that's training a lot of new developers. So I think it's really good to take good notes to make sure you're not asking the same questions over and over again. So if you need to ask them about a process or something, or how to set up your local dev environment, you take notes on all of that, and hopefully you contribute that back as documentation to the company, and that way you don't have to ask them over and over again. And then what's good is you'll usually have some kind of dev manager, if the company's at least like 10 people or 20 people maybe, and they can make a plan for you to help you progress to the next level. And that goes for any level. And people who don't kind of make a plan and break down and have steps, they progress much more slowly. I think that's pretty obvious through these levels in their career. So yeah, like I said before, you can get to this level through promotion, especially if you work at a larger company. They have more standards for promotion, but most junior developers, I can't remember the exact number, but I think it was at least 3/4 of them, will switch jobs and then become a mid-level at their second job. So here are some recommendations I have for working through as a mid-level, going to senior. I think it's really, really important to learn how to break down tasks fully and not give an estimate to people. Because when you go to senior or staff level, usually you're showing people like, this is what I can accomplish. And so you kind of have a portfolio of accomplishments. And one critical piece is, having people that can vouch for you. And so I think it shows someone's seniority if they can break down tasks well, step through problems well, and estimate somewhat correctly as we can in, software development. Yeah, so this might be an expression that I made up, but I think one thing I've realized over the years is that when I started out, I would try to code a ticket right away. I was like, I can knock this out, and I would just jump into the code. And now I spend more and more time every year, it seems like going to a whiteboard and working out the problem, pacing back and forth and trying to figure something out before I ever touch the code. And I think that's a really good skill to have. And something I see in so many people is they dive in before they've correctly thought about how to solve a problem. I don't think it's efficient or desirable to do it in the code first. Of course, there's the idea of prototyping and everything, but it's really good if you can step back and plan a little bit and then dive in and try to implement your solution, and then step back again and see, how did my solution work? Is there a better solution? Kind of like that. Yeah, and debugging is, of course, really, really important. And I can tell now that I've been participating in interviews at a few companies anyway. And one of the big differences between a really experienced developer and someone who's not experienced is how they debug and step through resolving an issue, and also how well they know and can use their tooling, because then you can tell that this person really knows how to debug a problem. Yeah, so most companies will they will be eager to let you dive into more and more complex problems. But some companies, especially larger companies, are very kind of gate kept. So sometimes it's hard, like you have to almost fight for you to be assigned a task if you're just coming in as a mid-level developer or you're a junior or something. But in that case, I think it's really good if you can pair with a senior developer. In fact, I think pairing is a really important way to train to kind of raise up senior developers at a company. So I really advocate for and love pair programming on my team and other places I've worked. And then another thing I think is super helpful is at companies where there's staff engineers and senior engineers, usually they're writing design docs. So they'll design some kind of feature, and in those docs, they'll write about all the trade-offs, all the different pieces of complexity, the different thoughts they have, why they chose the implementation they chose. And it's really good to try to break down those docs and even try to talk to the writer and ask them how they made it. That can really bring you up to speed and give you kind of a better understanding of the technologies you work with. And I don't know how to say this, but like get you to the next level more quickly if you can understand those kind of complex topics. So a senior developer, usually you need about 5 years of experience. I think I was almost 4, mostly because I worked for smaller companies. A lot of companies require you to have 5 years of experience or some kind of master's or whatever degree to get to this level. So usually you'll be roughly 5 years, maybe a little bit less for startups. And this is the end of the individual contributor track. Some companies might split senior into, they'll have extra levels just because they have to accommodate for a large workforce. Yeah, some people stay in senior developer, like I mentioned before, if they really like being in the code and don't want to share and do lots of other things or have a lot more meetings, then they'll stay a senior developer for a lot of their career. One of my friends was a senior developer for more than 10 years, maybe 10 to 15 years, and now he's just moving into technical leadership. So to be a senior developer, of course, you need to be really good at breaking down problems. You'll be assigned the most complex problems on the team. And a lot of those problems, you need to have solved a lot of problems in the past to get to that level of complexity. I think that the time requirements are valid, even though they're sometimes a little strict for making it to 5 years before you're senior, but there's just no shortcut to having some types of experience, to solving problems over and over again and learning about trade-offs and, you know, all those other things. So senior developers, you know, like I have one senior on my team, and when you give him a problem, he just knows how to tackle it, who and when to communicate to. And it's just really, it's like a load off of you, because they already know what to do, and there's not much training, there's no hand holding or any of that stuff. So, and that comes because they've had experience, of course. So they can jump into many different areas. They'll be able to help more junior teammates. I can always ask, hey, can you pair with this person? And then they're able to solve the problem, so I don't have to jump in and do it. Yeah, so this is the last level of developer that's still graded on their individual contributions to the team. Because when you move into management and other things, you're kind of graded on, are you a multiplier for the people on your team, not on your own individual contributions as much. So I don't know, formatting's off, I guess. So, how to get a senior developer position. Some of the recommendations that I have, if you want to get promoted at your company, then sometimes for senior developer or higher level positions, you need some kind of advocate for you, or it's much easier if you have an advocate. So it's really good as you're working as a mid-level, maybe to form a really good relationship with your manager, show them that you can deliver on time and that you communicate well, and then they will be a really good advocate for your promotion. And then it's also good to keep track. A lot of developers, like, they'll merge something and then forget about it. But it's really good, like, if you did something complex, or like you think this is a beautiful piece of code, then I think you should keep track of that. Like, you should keep a list of that. You should keep a list of the wonderful documentation that you wrote, of all the contributions you provided to the team, and then you'll be able to argue for your own promotion. And you can do that at any level, of course, but it's more critical the further along you get to have kind of a portfolio. And you can show that you've been able to manage tasks of increasing complexity, and you're already performing at the level of the next promotion, so you're already ready for it. And then, of course, as a senior developer, sometimes a big part of the job is to be able to mentor, onboard new developers. So you can start helping out with that if you want to be promoted to that level and show that you can already do it. Yes, and a lot of devs will get impatient if they're not promoted right away, because sometimes it's several years. Like, sometimes that's a big gap between, you know, going from junior to mid versus mid to senior. And so some companies will pad mid with other levels so that they can receive more yearly promotions or something. But yeah, sometimes it takes a little bit of patience to get to senior level. And of course, if a company is not promoting you, or you don't think they're promoting you fast enough, there's always the opportunity to go to another company that's a little smaller, or that values a particular skill that you have. Like, if you're really good at, I don't know, API design or something, and there's a particular company that really needs that skill, they might bump you up a little bit just because they value you a little bit more than another company. Yeah. So that was a lot, and I'm going to take a sip of water. And does anyone have any questions? So someone asked how I got through burnout and how I guard against it now. And I think one of the problems was, when I was starting out, I was really eager and I wanted to advance and push myself. And of course, working for startups didn't help a lot. But I think I wasn't fully prepared for the type of burnout that's different than other industries, because I worked in some service industries and doing random things before. And I would say I never had mental burnout. Like I had physical exhaustion. Like when I was a snow shoveler, I would just lay down when I got home. But I never had that type of mental burnout that I experienced in tech. So I wasn't prepared for it. And so I guess I had two kind of big burnouts, and the last one I had to take some time off of work. I would say now one of the things that's helping me is that I'm able to kind of see when it's coming, because I know about it now. And I just immediately will ask for a day off, or so I think the thing that's helping me now is I'm much more apt to communicate about things like my mental health and stuff. So I talk a lot with my boss about my mental health and burnout state. I think that's an important aspect of one-on-ones that I didn't get at previous companies for some reason. But I think it's good to talk about your mental health and your burnout state, and to kind of manage that, because there's a threshold. And I think once people reach the level of burnout, it's very hard to come back for that. So I think I kind of monitor myself more quickly. I don't know if this is a really good answer, because it's kind of internal to me, but I monitor myself. I try to take breaks. I do have a couple systems, like I got a treadmill so I could move around more and relax. I have my watch reminding me to take deep breaths, and every hour to stand up and walk around. And then I try to get in nature every once in a while so I can walk. I think that really helps me relax. So I found some things that help me relax, I guess. And also, I think part of burnout is like being really stressed. And I think when earlier in my career, I would think it was like the end of the world when I got a problem I couldn't solve. But now I'm like, oh, well, it has a solution somewhere. We'll do something. And it's not so stressful anymore. So, yeah, so I did freelance for quite a while before I got my first job in 2015. I was trying to build websites for people. I added a few like widgets into websites for people. But I found that my work was undervalued. I would put in a lot of hours to get maybe about minimum wage out of freelance. And then there was a lot of back and forth with clients, especially when you work with, I guess, small businesses. It's understandable that, they're trying to not spend too much money because, they're a small business. They have to be tight with the budget. So I think with experience in the software development industry and then working as a consultant, you make a lot more money, and you also work with people who understand your type of work better. And then you also know what to ask for, what kind of contracts and things to make with a client, and also to bill hourly. Yeah. Are you freelancing right now?
I'm still.
Yeah. Yeah, I think freelance is a really good opportunity to get experience, but once you hit the level where you can get a job, you're going to get much better experience working for a company for at least a little while, because you'll have that mentorship and learn how to write quality code. Okay, I'm going to quickly go through these. Is anyone here a principal, staff, tech lead, going to be? No? Okay. Oh, cool. Where do you work? Yeah, so that's a good question. So he's asking about how to learn and pick up new skills if you're already working full-time in one stack. When do you have the time to, I guess, learn something else? So I think early in my career, I did that through a lot of studying and hackathons and stuff like that, which I did get really burned out from hackathons because I went to one almost every other weekend for a year. So I think now what I do is to study. I set aside an hour every morning, and I don't make it all the time, but I try to set the goal at least 80% of all mornings. I'm going to study for an hour. And sometimes I do study in the evening or read a book on the weekend or build a project or something. But at least 1 hour, I set that aside as my golden time. Like, I'm not going to get bogged down with PR reviews or anything else. I need to work on myself and turn everything else off. So I do that. And then the other thing that I guess I have created a lot of creative control at my company right now. So I created this program we call Dev Days, which is 2 days a month where developers can study or learn anything. And there's a lot of companies that do that. I think Google calls it 20% time. Kroger, based out of Cincinnati, they do a program like that. And a lot of companies do, where you get a certain percentage of your at work time to study and develop yourself. And also work on projects that, might be beneficial to the company at some point. So you could see if your company will give you some time to do that. Yeah, so technical leadership. So they call them staff level engineers, and companies will call these different things. Sometimes they'll have a whole bunch of staff levels like Google does, or they'll have like staff and then tech lead, or just tech lead, or principal somewhere in there. But they're all kind of technical leadership roles. And so the dev manager won't be setting the technical direction for the team. That will be you as a staff engineer. And if there's a tech lead, they'll be leading it and you'll be working with them. And you, at this level, at senior level, sometimes you can get out of mentorship if it's something you don't want to do. You just want to be an individual contributor and that's it. But if you're in technical leadership, then you have to be a leader for your team, meaning you will be expected to frequently mentor, pair program, help out other people on the team in various ways, and sometimes be a full-time onboarder for new developers starting. And you'll start splitting your time between technical decision-making and actual coding. And as you progress through staff levels, usually you're doing a little less coding all the time. And I've definitely found that to be true at my levels. You can see the last point. I think this describes my work right now. I'm doing less coding and more meetings. So it's really important to be able to articulate ideas clearly with both technical and non-technical people at this time, in written and, both written and verbally. And a lot of times, your team will be getting all these new features and stuff you have to build that the company wants coming into the team. But then you're the one who really has to advocate for, hey, we need to do 20% of our time on technical debt. We really need to upgrade this, or in the future, this will happen. Sometimes you need to set a technical strategy or vision for your team. And if it's a large organization, of course, you could be combining that with other people's strategies and visions for the larger company vision. And you'll also partially work with the dev manager and somewhat independently to make sure your team stays unblocked. They're working in a good environment. Like for me, I check everybody's stand-ups every day. They have to mark if they're blocked or need assistance. And if anybody does, I'll reach out to them. Hopefully they reach out to me first, but I'll reach out to them and try to get everybody working so, they can stay productive and happy. So yeah, that's the last. I didn't include principal or, wait, I'm not sure what this is doing. Okay, yeah, I didn't include principal or anything else there because they're all kind of similar, and it really depends on the company, how they implement their staff roles. And there's a couple of books I recommend at the end that are really good that break this down a little bit more. So people management. This usually starts with a dev manager. This is actually a random image you can ignore. But yeah, it's nothing to do with the slide. So when you're a dev manager, you're more on the people side. So you're still a technical person. You're still usually almost always required to have worked as a developer before. And then sometimes developers are pushed into dev management, where a lot of them don't know what they're doing, aren't really good with managing people. That's a big thing that people have trouble with new dev managers, or sometimes people are pushed into dev management when they aren't ready or aren't the right fit, just because people think, oh, if they're a really good developer, then they should be a manager, but not all really good developers are good managers. So a very core responsibility of being a dev manager is recruiting and hiring. And sometimes this takes a lot of time, depending on the state of your team. And if you need to do, if you're, I guess if you're a small team, or if you are losing a few people, or maybe you have a ton of like technical backlog cleanup and stuff, or maybe you're missing a senior and you're bogged down with a bunch of juniors who need someone more experienced. So some dev managers spend the majority of their time doing recruiting and hiring. So that has to usually be something that you like to do, to be a dev manager. And then of course you'll have to be interfacing with other teams and stakeholders. You're responsible for the culture and team members being happy, and you're really the multiplier for your team, and also the one who takes responsibility for good deliveries and also for failures. You take that responsibility, even though it was the tech lead that designed the system, it was other engineers implementing it, it wasn't all your fault. You're still the one taking responsibility for everything that goes on in your team. And then you progress through more levels. You can become a director, you can oversee, you'll have managers reporting to you. You get less visibility into the day-to-day work of the teams. And then there's different kinds of complexities. This is probably far removed from everybody in this room, so I'm not going to talk too much about this. I've been reading a lot of books about software management, so I list them at the end if you're interested. And then of course, VP and CTO. The easiest way to get that position, I don't want to call it easy because starting a startup is really hard, but if you do start a startup, whatever level of engineer you are, you'll probably become the CTO and have to learn quickly. So you'll be doing a lot less coding, especially as the company grows. Compliance takes a lot of time, a lot of headache, and you'll be doing all of the unfun stuff at the company. So yeah, maybe fun for some people. Okay, so other roles, I mentioned these earlier, specialist or consultant. I think all of the consultants and specialists that I know, worked through being a senior engineer, and then they went off and are able to consult and command a good hourly fee. A lot of people like it because after they've worked for so many years for a company, it's kind of nice. Nobody caps their salary. They can make as much as they want, work their own hours from wherever they want. And some of the people I know, they specialize, like I know one person, I don't want to mention their name because you might know them, but they specialize in React. And last time I heard they were making $300 an hour billing companies for React development. Some people make more than that. So it can be very lucrative, especially if you niche down, but you need to have the kind of the experience to back it up. And then, yeah, you'll have to manage yourself, which is very difficult. So you have to really have good project management skills, communication. A lot of times you'll have to give estimates. So you really have to know like what kind of work will go into that problem and break down each step and account for complexity and things like that. So architecture, so depending on the company, like technical leadership positions do a lot of architecture as well. But it seems like mostly larger companies will have architect, chief architect, enterprise architect, stuff like that. And they'll do less coding, but usually still some coding, especially for prototyping and stuff like that. And they'll be able to analyze, articulate, create diagrams and documents outlining things and be able to show them to the company and kind of discuss technical decisions. So I don't have any books on the list about this, but I have a couple in my O'Reilly book subscription. So maybe I'll share those, or I'll add them to the slides later when I share these. And I wanted to include this because this is interesting. And I was actually thinking about working in this role before. Maybe I will in the future because it kind of goes along with content creation. But basically you'll create technical content or give talks for companies. This can look a little bit different depending on the company, but all major tech companies that I know of are employing people in this position. We call them developer advocate or developer evangelist. So for example, AWS, they have lots of developers who are users of that product and they want more developers to use their product. So they will hire people who create tutorials, create videos about their product, who go and give tech talks and network with other developers, trying to convince them to use their product, run meetup groups around their product, stuff like that. So that's kind of an interesting role where you need a little bit of developer experience, but you could probably get a developer evangelist role with 1 or 2 years, maybe a little bit more of developer experience. You don't have to make it all the way to senior developer usually. So those are a few of the other roles. There are many other roles that you could take or move into. Some people move into technical project management, and I think you know, a developer who moves into technical project management knows about development. That can be really nice to have in a project manager. I wanted to talk about this really quickly. Okay, yeah. So types of employment, because I think, and this is something I didn't realize when I started out, there are different types. Oh, I'm not at types of companies yet. Let me just talk about types of employment. I think we all know what these are. So freelancing, this is a good place to start. As I mentioned before, you can use platforms like Upwork. From my experience, it's very hard to get jobs that pay well on platforms like Upwork. They're very saturated, especially since countries, you know, people will hire for lower pay in countries that don't cost as much. So sometimes it's very competitive. Income isn't stable, but I think it's a really good way to get some experience. Some people stay as freelancers, but I think it's a little bit difficult to do from my experience and people I've seen. And then of course you can get contract employment. Some people like this for a while, especially after I super burned out a few years ago. I didn't want to work full time. I just wanted to contract, which weirdly enough, I ended up working full time, but as a contractor. And then I realized I'm just going to join full time because the only difference is I'll get health insurance. So anyway, sometimes they do these contract to hires, which can be good if you're new, if you want to prove yourself at a company, if it's a company you want to work for. One thing I have noticed as a contractor, if I'm kind of working with one company, is that, so for example, there was one company, I was working for a consultancy and they were contracting me out at another company. And this other company, well, it's a large company, but sometimes the team would go do things like play basketball at the company headquarters. I couldn't because it was a liability because I was a contractor. I couldn't do certain activities with them. If everyone else left early, I couldn't because I had to get enough billable hours. So I would be the only one in the office for a half day or whatever. So there are trade-offs. There's more flexibility. Being a contractor, it's also easier to let go of contractors. Like if they decide they don't need you for a full-time employee, they'll have to go through a series of steps. For a contractor, the next day they could just let you go. So this is most people's goal. They want some kind of W-2, usually full-time employment with a regular salary, good benefits, a lot of stability, and also not worrying about being fired as much, I guess, if you're doing a good job. So yeah, so this is the part I guess I wanted to get to, and the types of companies. So there are different types of companies, different sizes of companies, different types of companies will have different cultures that are better or not as good for some people to work at. So first I want to mention tech versus non-tech companies and just some opinions and things that I've seen. So working at a tech company versus a non-tech company, because I've worked at both as a developer. And even though I'm in a technical role, if I work at a tech company, I've noticed there are a lot more benefits usually at the tech company, and people value me more than if I work at a non-tech company. Like if I worked at a company that sold diet pills, which I did, basically I was just another employee, like doing something techie over there, and people didn't value my work. There wasn't as much mentorship. You don't get all the cool things that you see in tech companies in the day of the life videos or whatever that people post. Those are usually just at tech focused companies. And you have a lot more growth opportunities usually if you get a job at a tech company, like specifically a software company. You have more mentorship opportunities because usually they hire some really good devs, and also have better systems for mentorship and growth of developers. So yeah, start with startups. Usually startups have less than 100 employees, and they're kind of called a startup because, or the word startup kind of gives people this image of the culture. It's like a fast-paced work environment. It values hard work. Some companies will literally post in their job description, expect to work long hours and very hard, and they won't, unfortunately, won't hire people with maybe other obligations in life. So it's a certain type of work. Not everybody likes working at a startup. Like I work at a startup, and when I interview, I make sure to ask and be sure that somebody is right for the startup culture. Even though our startup, we're not like some startups, we just, people will clock out 5 or 6, but I think, we expect people to show up and work every day. Startups are very famous for burnout versus any other type of company. I've experienced this, tons of people have experienced that. So we are also trying to work to avoid that at my company right now, encouraging people to talk about their mental health, giving them unlimited days off, finding different programs that maybe they could participate in to hopefully prevent that for all of us. It's just something we have to work to prevent in startup land. And some startups, especially some smaller ones or very fast growth ones, you might not have that many mentorship opportunities. So I think it's very difficult sometimes for someone starting with 0 experience to work at a startup, because they're pushed, they have investment, they're pushed to grow, whether for better or worse, they're pushed to grow quickly. And you're kind of in the middle of that push that you don't have a lot of time to get ramped up on stuff, which can be important to have more time as a junior developer. So it's not always the best place to start. But, you'll also have a lot of creative control. Your input matters a lot more. You feel a lot less like a cog. So there's definitely trade-offs. Also, if your startup blows up, grows really big, then, you made a lot of money. So, and then you feel really good about, this is the product I built that all these people are using. So small companies, they're about startup size, but the difference is usually they're locally owned. There are a few software companies that aren't startups, meaning they don't like take investor money. They just grow naturally how and when they need to. There's a lot less pressure to grow. Sometimes these places are really good for starting out. Like my second job was at one of these companies. It was a small, less than 10-person consultancy. I worked with 3 senior developers, and it was so good. I got to learn a lot from them, working with them every day. I got to try out lots of things like cloud development, some Salesforce development, JavaScript, lots of different things. So that was a really good choice for my career. Medium companies are usually the most stable. A lot of them are very stable, and they have well-defined systems and processes. Usually they'll have a good training and onboarding program at this stage. And then, of course, enterprise companies get the most visibility, especially the FANG type large tech companies. They have lots and lots of processes and rules. So sometimes it's very hard to get your own opinions heard. I was talking to someone recently who said, you know, he had super seniors over here and super seniors over here, and he really couldn't contribute. He wasn't able to contribute meaningfully because everyone was blocking him from everything he wanted to do. Even though he had several years of experience, he wasn't able to kind of grow at his current position. So yeah, so in enterprises, sometimes you do feel like a cog, like you don't know, you don't have visibility into the impact of the features you're implementing and, you know, how they impact the overall company. And sometimes there's lots of back and forth for making changes. So some companies, like I worked at an enterprise once, sometimes you'll get, you know, 50, 60, 70 comments back and forth on a PR. It's like, oh, I just want to merge a PR, and all these discussions over it, and it takes a long time. So yeah, there's trade-offs to those type of companies. And then of course, consultancy. So I've gone back and forth between kind of working as a company building an internal product and working at a consultancy. A lot of times consultancies are actually, I don't think there's any enterprise consultancy that I know of, maybe one of the online websites, but they'll be small to medium-sized companies. A lot of times they seem to specialize in one type of work, like they'll do greenfield projects where they build fresh apps, and they have an internal team of consultants. They'll be building an app for another company. Brownfield, they'll be updating some kind of app for another company, or staff augmentation. So I did this for a little while, which is where how I mentioned before, where they sent me to another location to work with developers from another team, which is a little bit hard to fit in. I realized that it wasn't a good fit for me doing that. When I started there, I was hoping to do more greenfield projects. So I think that's a good thing to consider and ask about if you're thinking about working at a consultancy. So one benefit of working at a consultancy versus consulting on your own is that you're a full-time employee, so you get benefits. You know, you can take vacation days. If you're consulting on your own, you know, you don't make any money if you're not billing hours. But the consultancy will require a minimum number of billable hours, but they'll never like not pay you, you know. So it gives you a little bit more stability. And then one thing that I thought was good to mention, I guess, some companies will want you to have specific types of experience. So if your goal is to work at one company later, you might want to consider the first roles that you take. So for example, my company is B2B. We make business to business software. So we sell our software to businesses. And there are some nuances to different types of software development. I don't think, some people put a big distinction, say, oh, you have to have B2C experience or you have to have B2B experience. I don't think it's that important, but some people do. and they'll favor, having that specific experience. So that can be a good thing to just take note of and be aware of, I think. Okay, so that's everything. I'm almost done. So I have a couple notes. This will be quick on setting a goal about where you want to end up. So I think as I've worked with students, I think it's really good to kind of line up where they want to be in 5 years. I think these 2 questions, or 3 questions. Where do you want to be in 5 years? What lifestyle, what you want, what style of work do you prefer? And a lot of people will have a lot of ideas for these things that might change over time, but it's good to have some kind of a starting point. And sometimes they have family or other obligations, so they'll have to fit into a certain category, and that can be a good starting point for making a goal. Because I think setting a goal is good, because from a goal, then you can make a strategy. So then you find mentors who are at that position or somewhere on the roadmap to getting that position. And also having a goal will let you choose, or goals or whatever, it will let you choose what's the right company type for me, and what kind of company will value the skills. And then you can continuously ask for feedback as you move along your plan or your strategy toward your goal. So it gives you kind of a direction and something to work toward. Yeah, so, and I want to finish with this because this is a question that I seem to be asked all the time for the last 5 years. So a lot of people wonder, as I'm going along in my career, how should I specialize, or how should I be a generalist? And this is my short answer. So I think for someone anywhere up to the senior level, it's good to specialize in one language, especially as you're starting out. Specialize in one language and some tools and frameworks around that language, so that you can build some good projects that showcase your skills. You need deep enough skills in at least one area to show people that you are able to do the work as a developer. But it's also good to have knowledge of other things, and more so as you go along. So for example, if you're a web developer, it's really good to know a lot about different areas of web development, even though they're shallow. Like, I'm not an accessibility expert, but I know enough to where I know the kind of questions to ask. I know kind of the broader picture of a lot of different areas of web development. And in some ways, generalizing and having a broader perspective gets more important as you go along. Like for my role right now, doing some architecture, working as a tech lead, I have to know about a lot of different systems. And I think being able to work in mobile and web and ML and so many different things has really helped me where I'm at right now, because I have a much broader set of knowledge, but I also specialize in a few areas, pretty much in Python and some tooling around Python, and then in JavaScript with Vue.js. And I've written down my specializations. I have the short list, and outside of that, I try not to go deep in anything because I just don't have time for it, basically. So those are my ideas about specialization versus generalization. I wrote a bit more about it in a book that I wrote. If anyone wants a free copy, just let me know. I kind of dumped all of my thoughts in that book. So I have like five physical copies with me, and then I can also give you a free ebook if you want. Yeah, so these are the resources, and I'll post this link so you can see. Of course, I recommend my own book, but there's also this good freeCodeCamp article that I found on related tangential career paths, like you can move to from software development. There's some excellent books, like The Missing README came out recently, and I think it's great. It's basically a lot of advice, including a little chapter about architecture and some other things for newer developers and developers just starting out, that I think from the time you get your first job, that's who the book's written for. So that's a really good book. Of course, there's the classic Pragmatic Programmer, which is in version 2. A couple other books, Learning Agile, I think that's super important. I thought that was the best book I've found about Agile for beginners, because it shows all the different methodologies from Scrum, Kanban, extreme programming, a few other minor flavors. And because most companies modify to use their own flavor. We use kind of Kanban with a little bit of Scrumban and some other things. So everyone has their own interesting setup, but that kind of gives you the overview of everything. So here are some others that, you know, I put the junior to mid first, and then the mid to senior. Code That Fits in Your Head is a book that I dove into recently. I thought it was really good. Staff engineer is great to learn about technical leadership roles. If you have the pleasure of working with legacy code, that's a great book, working with legacy code. And then there's a bunch of management books. I just listed off kind of my favorites over there. And then one of my video series on YouTube, I just kind of dump a lot of tips and advice from things that I've experienced over the years. I think there's like 27 videos in the series. Yeah, feel free to check it out. And then I do have a video on avoiding burnout, or my experience with burnout, but it's from a couple years ago, so I can't remember what I said, but maybe I'll make an updated one. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Okay, so there's a question online. It says, I'm confused as a BT Tech student whether I should focus on low-level programming like C and C++, or high-level like ML blockchain dev. I kind of like both. I wanted to work on both.
Yeah, I think that's a common question for newer people, which technology to use. And I don't think there's a right answer for it, because it's mostly about your preference. However, if you want to work for a certain type of company, you can see that some companies, probably the ones using ML blockchain, might be more prone to giving you remote work or the type of work culture that you want, versus a lot of companies with C++ or C development might have more of an in-person work culture, just from my experience. But I don't think there's one better system to go in. I think what I did, I tried a lot of different things and found out kind of what I liked. So I think that's probably the way you should go. Also, for my first jobs, I kind of looked at what was hiring for, where were the most jobs opened, and I tried to go to those, I tried to learn those skills for those open jobs, like, you know, React and Java. Those, I think those are probably the two most hireable skills. There's a couple skills like that that have the most job openings. So that was kind of my view at first. And then from there, I didn't know, should I do ML, blockchain? What should I do? Should I work at the intersection of technologies? I think that's just something that you'll have to figure out over time. Yeah, I think it was a little difficult because, so when I first started, and I think the experience for most newer, especially younger people, is there's a ton of good video content and tutorials for people who are starting out in development or newer. But most of those types of things don't go past beginner, sometimes maybe intermediate level. As you get deeper, I've just had to learn how, like, I wasn't a very good reader for a long time. So I actually took classes in speed reading and tried to improve my reading skills. But I think a lot of the books, I've just found that, so a couple of types of content. Books have been really good for deep technical content, especially at the level I'm at, I'm searching for something deeper. And I think books really provide that. especially from a couple of publishers like O'Reilly's been really good. And then I can't remember, there's, No Starch Press for Python. There's a couple book publishers. And then Pragmatic Bookshelf. There's a couple of them that make really good, deep technical content. And then I also try to watch conference talks and conference workshops, because especially since COVID, they used to not post the workshops. I think a lot of conferences would just post the talks, and you get a lot of good ideas from conference talks. And sometimes, especially now, you can also find conference workshops, and those will be sometimes half day or full day workshops, and they dive deep into the technical content. Like there was one good one, I think from PyConf or Python WebConf. They dove into SQL Alchemy 1.4 and the new updates. It was really a deep dive. It was really awesome. So I found that my consumption of, or the types of learning material that I've consumed has really changed over the years as I've been searching for things to fit, I guess, my needs now. I think one thing at my work that we're doing to encourage people to read is a book club. And right now we're doing it with the Pragmatic Programmer. You basically should read about 3 or 4 pages a day to, get up to speed on the material. It's pretty easy to go through. I think there are some things that can encourage developers or encourage you or motivate, we can motivate ourselves to read more. I also got a tablet called the Reflector, Remarkable. And it's a e-reader, but you can write in it too. I found for some reason I just like doing that, and then I can also take it with me easily instead of bringing books with me. So then if I'm at the airport or on a plane or whatever, I'll hit my 7th year anniversary in 2 months, I think, as a professional. I don't really count the freelancing and other stuff. That's hard. I would say that a lot of companies don't do those so much anymore. They'll do challenges. I found that over the years, they've asked less data structures and algorithms questions, and more practical questions like actually designing an API or implementing a new feature or debugging an issue for the fake user or something like that. But yeah, I do forget. I've forgotten data structure and algorithms so many times. I mean, there are some companies like Google who can afford to do those type of questions and have a long interview process, but a lot of companies have realized that they'll lose good candidates, like weeding out potentially good candidates, asking them questions that are completely unrelated to their day-to-day work. I think for new skills that I'm trying to pick up now, they're directly things that I think we could implement to help us in our stack. Like I did a lunch and learn at my company recently on GraphQL. And I think that's how, because I only have a limited amount of time to learn new skills. And since I'm invested in the company I'm working for, I'm trying to learn skills aligned with those right now. Is there any book on good documentation? I think The Missing README has some, The Missing README does have some sections on writing good documentation. And there's also another book, I think it's Software Engineering at Google, and they really dive into their documentation practices. And they have a lot of processes concerning documentation. And I've actually adopted a few of those. So I thought that was a good book about documentation. From what I've seen, it's easier to get a job as a front-end developer as a junior. I think there's a lower barrier to entry to get a junior level job as a front end. And then from there, you can move into anything. There's one girl who started at my company. She started as a junior. Now that she has the job, like she's done some Python PRs and, you can work anywhere in the stack. But yeah, I think there's a lot more deep technical knowledge, I think, or deeper technical knowledge to get your first, or to get a back end job than a front end job. I'm not saying that front end is less important or anything, but just from where the industry is, if you can do a new feature in some kind of JavaScript framework, then you can probably try to get your first dev job on the front end. No, I think a lot of companies, depending on the size, expect you to pick up, as a software engineer, they'll expect you to pick up other languages even, and be able to pick them up quickly. Yeah, it's really annoying. It's like, it's documented, but in somebody's head somewhere, or maybe in their personal digital notes. Yeah, so, and this is a problem that I've had a couple times where I just try to slowly pull something out of somebody's head and document it for everybody. And it is frustrating because then you have a couple human gatekeepers of knowledge, and there are certain tasks like that are blocking people that anybody could do really if it was documented, but you're waiting for one person because it's undocumented. So I think like my team now, I kind of added some things to our culture points like visibility, you know, making everything public, sharing knowledge, stuff like that is just so important to focus on that as a team. Yeah, it could be that. It's important to document processes, like a PR process, you know, everything from PR processes to system design to local dev workflows, and keeping those things up to date. And if there are clients to onboard, you know, having that kind of documentation. If, you know, and for different companies, there'll be different things. Like for us, if someone's asking us to do a SQL query on something, it doesn't have to be just one developer who does that. We can just put it in a doc and then anyone can grab that and just do it or run it. So yeah, so we've been adding lots of documentation.
There's a lot of patterns in software development that you can study and learn. You can say, reuse the flux pattern, and you can link someone to an article and say, use this pattern. But there's also a lot of times when you're doing software development, you're creating software from scratch, and you run into an issue that there isn't a well-defined pattern that exists to solve it. Or perhaps there is, but it's in some book written in the 1970s and no one on your team's read that book. So you invent a new pattern, or maybe you reinvent a pattern that already existed, but you didn't know about it. And in the process of inventing this pattern of how we go about doing this specific thing in the code, you document that somewhere so that when a new person joins the team, you can say, oh, this is how we write unit tests. We do it this way. Here's examples of how to do that. Or this is how we do whatever the pattern is that this is how we genericize these specific things. Here's an example of how to interact with that code if you need to add more to it.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point about new people joining, because one thing that's helped a lot is we've had a couple new people join, and I just follow their first few weeks. Every single question they have that they can't find, then I realize a better way to either organize the documentation or add to the documentation. And that way it's all there and we're sharing all the knowledge. So I think new people onboarding bring up a lot of holes in documentation. Yeah, I think it used to be easier before COVID, because some of them shut down during COVID, but there's a couple good ones. I think I made a video or maybe two about hackathons on my channel, but like there are some for charities like Startup Weekend. If they still do those, I think that would be, it's a really good opportunity, and you're also giving back in some way. Oh no, that's not Startup Weekend. Or did I say Startup Weekend? Oh, Startup Weekend is not that. That's Give Camp. That's for charities. Startup Weekend is kind of cool, and they host them all over the country, so you can city hop if you want, if you really want to do that. And they basically have like 48 hours to create a startup company. So people who aren't software devs go to, business people, designers, all different kinds of people will go, and you kind of create a team. And then, oh, I did one with Jared one time. Yeah, we made a little company for a little while out of it. It was fun. We built an app.
We still have friends from that company.
Yeah, we still have several friends from that. Yeah, there's a couple like that. I think I found out about those because I was working out of a co-working space and going to a lot of meetups, and people would just tell me about things. There's a couple that are sponsored by Indiana. So Indiana, or the Indy Chamber.
Yeah.
They,
Chamber of Commerce, I think.
yeah, they do a hackathon every year. Yeah, I think for juniors, it is more beneficial to work in person if you can. It's a little bit harder to mentor, like you said, ask questions right away if it's remote. Yeah, I think I had that benefit of being in person, and now I'm remote. I love being remote. But some of the other members and the more junior members of the team, some of them want to be in person. So a few of them that are in Indiana, I'll drive to a co-working space and meet them sometimes because they want to meet. Yeah, it can be helpful.
Lots of organic discussion that came out of this.
Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, thank you everyone online who showed up.
Bye.
Thanks for watching this video. We'll be uploading more throughout the year featuring other local speakers, so be sure to subscribe to see more. If you know someone who would benefit from this video, please share it with them. And feel free to reach out to freeCodeCamp Indy if you'd like to speak at one of our future events. Thanks again.